For those of our audience who are maybe not familiar with the independent panel for pandemic preparedness and response, could you explain to us a bit about how and why that panel was set up, and what did you identify as the key measures needed to prevent future pandemics?
So we'll all recall that we became aware of this virus very, very early in 2020. And there was a detailed chronology which was compiled for our panel with work led by Dr. Sudhir Singh, a Kiwi who was my Sherpa for the panel work. And so if you follow that chronology, by the end of January, 30 January, there had been a public health emergency of international concern declared by the Director General of WHO. He then, by mid-March, used the terminology pandemic. That has no legal meaning, by the way, in the international health regulations or to WHO. But I think Dr. Tedros became so concerned that there wasn't enough action that he felt, in the light of what was happening, that he had to use that term. So in May each year, the World Health Assembly, which is really the supreme governing body for WHO, had its annual meeting. And it was online because of the pandemic. And what it asked for in a long resolution on the pandemic was for Dr. Tedros, the Director General, to initiate an impartial, independent, and comprehensive review of the international experience of WHO's coordination of response to the pandemic. Now, I think that probably when they asked for that in May 2020, they thought it would all be done and dusted within a year, because we had to report back within a year. And the rest is history. You know, we were only in relatively early stages of a vaccine rollout in some parts of the world by May 2021. So this was the origin of the panel, the World Health Assembly resolution. And then in July, following up just a few weeks after that, Dr. Tedros asked me and the former Liberian president, Ellen Johnson Sirleaf, who's an amazing and wonderful woman, would we co-chair it? And clearly this was really mission impossible to bring down a report that was useful in a relatively short time, but we accepted, and then by September we had a full panel in place, and we got on and actually had a report ready to present to the World Health Assembly in May 2021 on time. So the key areas of our findings were that the response, clearly wasn't good enough. I mean, that's the understatement of the year, but that's the gist of it. And for a whole lot of reasons, the alert system wasn't adequate to sound the alarm. The WHO lacks a lot of powers with respect to what it can and can't do in response, and we can talk about that later when we get to details of reforms. When the pandemic was declared, not enough countries took any notice anyway. So this was the gist of it. And we said you need a substantial reform of the international and national architecture for pandemic response to do better in future. We proposed that a leader-level Global Health Threats Council be established, led by heads of state and government from around the world, and including civil society, private sector, and eminent scientific expertise, just to keep the pressure on for mobilising around pandemic preparedness and response, because the past history has been of a cycle of panic and neglect. And as we can see now, we're through the panic cycle, we're into the neglect cycle. And if we don't make some changes in the way we deal with it, we'll be back all over again. So this overarching governance, monitoring, oversight is very important. We did recommend dedicated financing for pandemic preparedness and response. We recommended changes to the international health regulations and supported the negotiation of a new pandemic legal instrument. We had a lot to say about how to overcome the vaccine and other inequity in the future. And then we made some proposals for strengthening the independence of WHO itself. So those were the key measures, and happy to go into further detail about any of them as a package of recommendations.
What would you say was the greatest mistake that was made during the COVID-19 pandemic?